I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 111 of the House of Commons Standing Committee of Natural Resources, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, June the 6th, 2024. The committee is resuming its study of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as the best we can. I use these two cards for the folks online and in the room. Yellow is a 30-second warning. Red is time's up, but I will not interrupt you mid-sentence so you can finish your thoughts. Now I'd like to welcome our witnesses for today's study. From the Business Council of Alberta, Adam Legge, President by video conference. From the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, Deborah Yedlin, President and Chief Executive Officer by video conference. And from Canada's Building Trades Unions, Sean Strickland, Executive Director by video conference. You will have up to 5 minutes for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. And we will begin for our first 5-minute opening statement from Adam Legge from the Business Council of Alberta. Mr. Legge, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, committee members. I represent the Business Council of Alberta, a public policy organization of Alberta's largest employers and most successful entrepreneurs. I'm speaking from the traditional territory of Treaty 7 and the Métis Nation of Alberta Regions 5 and 6. I'd like to speak to 4 key points: economic value, Indigenous reconciliation, trade value, and building major projects in Canada. In terms of economic value, the oil and gas sector is Canada's most productive sector and our most important export sector. It's no secret this country is struggling greatly with productivity and a lower quality of life for Canadians compared to our peer nations, and therefore further production and export activity in that sector benefits Canada as a whole. EY estimates between 2024 and 2043, the expanded Trans Mountain system will pay $3.7 billion in wages, generate $9.2 billion in GDP, and pay $2.8 billion in government taxes. The Bank of Canada predicts a 0.25% bump in GDP in Q2 of this year due to the expansion. The CER estimates the TMX expansion will close the gap between benchmark oil prices and what Canadian producers receive by about $9 per barrel. This will result in more royalties and tax revenue for governments. CAP notes that oil and gas companies paid $34 billion in oil and gas royalties to provincial governments in 2022, so it is reasonable to expect this figure will grow because of the TMX expansion, positively supporting Canada's finances. We as a nation should be actively working to create more opportunities to grow our energy sector, its production and export, and not curtailing it with layered policy. In terms of Indigenous reconciliation, as been noted by previous witnesses, the future of the pipeline could be a watershed moment in righting the wrongs of the past by enabling Indigenous ownership of the pipeline at some point in the future. One can look at the opportunities for reconciliation being generated through the Cedar LNG project that is majority owned by the Haisla First Nation. At the final investment decision announcement, Crystal Smith, Chief Counselor of the Haisla Nation, said, quote, "Cedar LNG will make the most significant mark on economic reconciliation ever in our country. With Cedar LNG, we have proven that Indigenous communities can successfully forge a path to economic independence and generational prosperity," end quote. There is opportunity for the TMX expansion at the right time to do the same through an Indigenous equity ownership position, and that benefit will be on top of the incomes generated from the estimated $4.9 billion in contracts with Indigenous businesses during the construction phase of the project. From a trade value perspective, Canada's energy sector made up 23% of Canada's total trade export value in 2023. The expansion creates even greater value opportunity. However, Canada is highly reliant on a single trading partner, the United States. Exports to the U.S. account for 77% of Canada's total export trade value. With uncertainty as the outcome of the looming U.S. election for diversification of our trade portfolio, the expansion project provides welcome optionality for our energy products to go to other markets that can diversify our portfolio portfolio and reduce exposure to risks such as downturn in the U.S. economy, energy demand, or retaliatory trade measures. Canada should be doing more to support the export of our natural resources to our allies and other nations in need of them, largely in pursuit of their own decarbonization efforts, whether it is oil, LNG, propane, ammonia, or critical minerals. The expansion can and should be the start of further expansion of Canada's resource export capacity. In terms of building major projects, Canada struggled to get big things built, and the TMX expansion project is illustrative of that challenge. We have a lengthy and uncertain regulatory and permitting process in Canada, a process with an inappropriate degree of political involvement. We must fix this so we can be recognized globally as a place that can build large projects quickly, efficiently, safely, and to the highest environmental and reconciliation standards. Our 2023 report, Future Unbuilt, addressed many of the changes needed in Canada's regulatory and permitting process. The Ministerial Working Group on Regulatory Efficiency for Clean Growth Projects Action Plan made some progress but did not go far enough. And adding to that challenge, there remain concerns that the federal government did not go far enough when it amended the Impact Assessment Act in response to last year's Supreme Court decision. We must use the experience of this expansion project and global best practices to further refine and improve Canada's regulatory and permitting process. In closing, the TMX expansion is an important project for Canada's most productive sector, the energy sector. Even with cost overruns, it will be a huge net positive for our country. In fact, Canada needs more big projects like this one, and we need to build them faster. Canada has a chance to globally step into the spotlight and deliver things the world needs right now: energy, minerals, food, wood, and more. We must seize this moment for Canadians and for the world. We must improve our approvals process in Canada to allow us to build the right things for the world and build them fast. That will help generate prosperity for Canadians and solve global challenges. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your opening statement, Mr. Legge. We'll now go to Deborah Yedlin from the Calgary Chamber of Commerce. You have 5 minutes and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to present to you today regarding the economic benefits of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I represent the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, which includes businesses large and small in Calgary. It's important we look at this project despite the cost overruns and time it took to build and recognize it is important for the country in the long run. We've become too focused on the short term, quarterly results or election cycles without realizing projects that are worthy take time, and yes, sometimes they can be over budget. From the perspective of Trans Mountain, failure was not an option. This project needed to proceed to break our entire dependence on the United States as our only export market for crude oil and to increase the amount of money we receive per barrel produced. One of the key measures used in this context is a differential between Western Canada Select and West Texas Intermediate. For every dollar the differential goes down, it means an additional $1 billion to companies and the economy. It's at $13 now and is expected to narrow to $9 because of the Trans Mountain expansion. That's another $4 billion in annual revenues flowing into the country, which translates into $2 billion a year in government revenues, half of which goes directly to the federal government. We own the resource. We should be getting the highest price for it. But without options for egress to other markets, returns have long been compromised. As a trading nation, the more access we have to new markets, the better it is for us. This pipeline opens new trading routes. No country ever suffered from having more options for trading. Also important is the context of market valuations of the energy companies themselves. It bears mention that Canadians from coast to coast, through pension plans and mutual funds, own shares in these energy companies. It's for the benefit of all Canadians that returns are maximized. People are concerned about the costs. That's what gets the headline. But even with the cost overruns, the tolls levied on the shippers will cover approximately 30% or $9 billion of the cost of the tolling. While this is more than what was expected, consider that shipping oil by rail, which has been an important source of transportation, costs shippers between $15 and $22 US per barrel. The TMX investment will pay for itself in the next 10 to 12 years. It also has to be noted that the cost overruns are covered by issued and outstanding debt, which will be part of the valuation of the asset when it is sold. It is not for the taxpayers to bear. Beyond that, the numbers show opportunity cost. If the pipeline wasn't built, it would amount to about $240 billion over a 20-year period. Who can afford that, given the fiscal challenges facing the country? Let's break down the numbers. $34 billion to buy the project, about $8 billion in equity. Revenues will reach $3 billion, expenses $500 million, and debt servicing costs are $1.6 billion. Revenues more than cover the servicing costs. Over the next 20 years, the value of revenue generated by Trans Mountain, depending on the discount rate, is between $26 and $38 billion. The higher the discount rate, the lower the valuation. During a time of falling interest rates and as a project is effectively de-risked, the valuation should go up. So was it worth the price tag? Yes, because of the value that will accrue to Canadians, starting with a 0.25% increase to our GDP in the third quarter. So what were the reasons for the overruns? Time is one reason. Approvals that were given were withdrawn. The scope of the project changed. New approvals had to be granted. 157 conditions needed to be met. 69 agencies were involved. 130 Indigenous communities consulted. It was technically more challenging than expected, including 2 mountain ranges and 47 slopes with a more than 15% grade. The pandemic didn't help, nor did weather events such as wildfires or atmospheric rivers that caused flooding. The project was the largest archaeological dig in Canadian history, with 255,000 First Nations artifacts uncovered at 360 sites, and 27,000 birds' nests were monitored. Finally, shipping channels off the BC coast were improved as part of the work, which is of net benefit to all export and import activity. There is no world in which estimating the cost of such a complex project was easy or could be accurate. Instead of being critical, we should think about it in the context of how Canada has set a new standard for pipeline construction, including the incorporation of ESG metrics and the benefits that will accrue to Canadians over the life of the project. But here's what's also important. This project set the stage for true economic reconciliation. It included almost $5 billion in procurement deals, and 10% of the workforce came from Indigenous communities. This is relevant when we think about who the buyers might be when the government decides to sell the asset. And this shouldn't happen until these tolls are decided, because this is critical to the valuation of TMX. Furthermore, there needs to be clarity on the emissions cap, which is a de facto production cap and could compromise the barrels entering the pipeline. No project is perfect, but Trans Mountain, despite all its challenges, will prove to be of net benefit to Canadians and the Canadian economy for decades to come. Thank you for allowing me to present this afternoon, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Yedlin, for your opening statement. We'll now go to Sean Strickland from the Canada's Building Trades Unions. You have 5 minutes, sir. The floor is yours. Mr. Strickland, you're on mute, so if you could just start over and unmute yourself. There you go.
Thank you, There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for the opportunity to address you here this afternoon and speak about the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. My name is Sean Strickland. I'm the Executive Director of Canada's Building Trades Unions, an affiliation of 14 international unions who represent 60 different trades and 600,000 members from coast to coast. Of our affiliates, 4 are concerned with pipeline construction. LIUNA, representing laborers and construction craft workers, the United Association, representing welders and pipe trades, Teamsters, who move pipeline equipment and materials, and the International Union of Operating Engineers, who operate and maintain the heavy equipment. Together, our 4 pipeline unions and signatory contractors have constructed nearly 90% of all major federally regulated pipelines in Canada. Patrick Campbell, who sits on our Canadian Executive Board for the Operating Engineers, gave evidence earlier this week, and I'd like to thank him for sharing his depth of expertise with you. As you've heard from previous witnesses, and which I will reiterate, the construction of the 980-kilometer Trans Mountain Pipeline is a major nation-building project which brings Canadian energy to Pacific markets. The successful completion of this project is an ongoing, fantastic testament to the engineering and construction capability of Canada's pipeline industry. This is a major accomplishment for the benefit of all Canadians. However, as you've heard from others, there have been real challenges, foreseen and unforeseen, to this project. In the clearly predictable category, one of the foreseen challenges was labor supply. As you heard earlier, the involvement of unionized contractors and workers was not by choice, but by necessity, with approximately a fifth of the project delivered through signatory contractors. And this was only once it became apparent in 2020 that due to regulatory delays, alternative and non-union contractors simply could not supply sufficient workers in competition with other projects that paid higher wages. This is a common challenge: tight skilled labor supply and what's called project stacking. And these factors frequently contribute to major project delays. In future, as we have recommended in other venues, strong workforce development planning is critical to ensuring there are enough skilled trades workers available to take on such nation-building and economy-driving projects. I also reiterate comments that I made previously at other committees that Canada's building trades unions believes that any time the government of Canada makes an investment or puts skin in the game, that it should come with strong labor conditions, good wages and benefits, prevailing wages, as well as apprenticeship requirements and local hiring and Indigenous hiring obligations. These measures aren't nice to haves. They are essential to major project delivery. Strong apprenticeship requirements ensure we build future skilled trades labor supply, and strong wages and benefits ensure that workers are attracted to major projects when and where they are needed. They also ensure that Canadian construction workers see real benefits and are adequately compensated for the work. You've also already heard about the other challenges, the lack of regulatory efficiency that drove up costs, unforeseen events such as the atmospheric rivers, floods, wildfires, global pandemic, to name a few, all of which disrupted construction operations. Imagine going to work on a construction site wearing a mask and adhering to protocol that was in place during COVID. Very difficult for workers to work in those kinds of environment. But despite all these unforeseen and uncontrollable challenges, the men and women of the building trades delivered. They built one of the most complex, environmentally protected, and safest pipelines ever completed, not just in Canada, but in the world. It is a project with an immense legacy beyond what high-level balance sheets show. Hundreds of new skilled trades apprenticeship opportunities for Canadians and Indigenous peoples, more than 35,000 jobs during the construction, hundreds more for maintenance and environmental monitoring, and downstream multiplier jobs and economic benefits throughout Canada for the input materials in fabrication and welding shops right across our country. Canadians should be proud of what our skilled trades workers, engineers, and contractors managed to accomplish. And we should learn important lessons for the future about workforce planning, regulatory efficiency, and labor procurement so that major project delivery can be improved in the future. I thank you, and I look forward to today's discussions.
Thank you, Mr. Strickland. That concludes our opening statements. We'll now go to the first round of questioning, which is a 6-minute round each for each party. And I'll start with Ms. Stubbs. Ms. Stubbs, you have the floor and you have 6 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses here today who have talked about the long-known and proven importance of oil and gas to the entire Canadian economy, to Indigenous communities for opportunities that otherwise are lacking in many of the regions and remote areas where they live, and of course about the facts that the oil and gas sector does and has for decades employed Indigenous Canadians at a much higher degree than other sectors. Thank you also for articulating the importance of LNG and energy transportation infrastructure for the entire country. Of course, the facts about TMX, though, are that the federal government naturally failed to enforce the rule of law, to give political and legal certainty to the private sector proponent that they could go ahead and build their big project that is in the national interest of Canada, even after federal approval. Of course, in the case of LNG, we all do know that the only shovels in the ground that are on an LNG export terminal in Canada are the ones originally approved by the former Conservative government, LNG Canada. 0 LNG export terminals have been constructed in Canada since, even though there have been 18 proposals by private sector proponents since this government took office in 2015. And the United States, of course, has rapidly constructed 22 export terminals in the exact same time frame, which goes to, of course, the points that each and every one of you have made about the regulatory uncertainty, inefficiency, and permitting. Those are exactly the issues that common sense conservatives seek to fix for all Canadians and to the benefit for every single community across this country. So those all facts being set, and also, of course, the fact that for the TMX pipeline, it's not quite true that it's the only export pipeline available. Of course, the vast majority of that product still goes out from the Gulf Coast of the U.S. And in fact, the staggering and stunning decision was this Prime Minister's unilateral decision to veto and overrule the Northern Gateway pipeline, which was the standalone export pipeline that had been previously unanimously approved, and that the court said the Prime Minister could go back and get Indigenous consultation right on. Of course, he surprised all the Indigenous communities who supported Northern Gateway, didn't consult them on that, vetoed the pipeline. That's what killed standalone export infrastructure for Canada. And here we are with the TMX now well behind schedule, well over budget, and we all know darn well that Canada now is already running out of pipeline export capacity. So thank you, Ms. Yedlin, for your point that is so true, that the emissions cap is a production cap. Could you explain the impact of the production cap on Canada, on the royalties and the taxes that get paid that provide services that all Canadians care about, and on the impact on TMX? Adam, you may want to comment on that as well. And thank you to the representatives of the workers who do all the work here.
Sure, thank you. I would be happy to just go through some of the numbers. There was a report published by Deloitte that found that the cap would curtail production by 10%, 626,000 barrels a day by 2030, and also curtail natural gas production by 12%. It would hit Alberta the hardest, 3.6% less investment, 70,000 jobs lost, and a 4.5% decrease in the province's economic output by 2040. Ontario would also lose 15,000 jobs, $2.3 billion from its economy, and Quebec would also lose 3,000 jobs and $400 million from its economy. So the entire country would experience an economic loss of about 1% of GDP, translating into lower wages, the loss of nearly 113,000 jobs, and a 1.3% decrease in government tax revenues. We already know that we're struggling with GDP growth, and this would represent a significant decrease in our economic opportunities. And as Adam pointed out, the productivity factor would also be compromised. This is something that would also compromise the valuation of Trans Mountain. We know it is contracted, but there is a portion that is not. And if there's no certainty in terms of what can be produced to be fed into that pipeline, the valuation of the asset will be compromised.
Thank you for those facts. And Adam, I don't know if you want to add some comments or context to this. And also, if you do have comments on the regulatory uncertainty and the permitting timelines, and especially your point, too, about the fact that the government hasn't gone far enough on fixing the broken system that they introduced in the first place, C-69, otherwise known as the Impact Assessment Act, which was declared unconstitutional.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Stubbs. I'll touch on the regulatory issue first. In our report of last year, it's very clear that the regulatory system is broken in Canada. We are not building things fast enough. We're not giving investors certainty, which sends a signal to the world that investment is not to be guaranteed here in the country. And I can tell you that when CEOs are standing in front of their boards asking for investment capital, the first question that the board will ask is there certainty and confidence that this investment will actually materialize? And if a CEO can't guarantee that to their board, it's unlikely the board will get final investment decision, and they'll scan the globe where their certainty is there and where the returns are greater, and they will put their capital there. And the signal that Canada, unfortunately, is sending is that we can't give that certainty, and so capital is going elsewhere. In terms of some of the changes that were made in the Impact Assessment Act, we don't feel that they went far enough. There's a whole host of issues, whether it's the concept of standing, the continued political risk associated with ministerial designation and decision even after an extensive process. I see, Mr. Chair, you're holding a red card. I guess that.
Thank you for your comments. Hopefully there'll be more time to get into more issues. And of course, just to be careful in the use of the word we, certainly there's only one party that's been in government for 9 years. Thank you for all your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Legg, for seeing the red card times up. As I mentioned earlier, you can finish your thought. I just don't want to cut you off if you're in mid-sentence, but I do appreciate you being aware. Thank you. We'll now go to our next speaker, Ms. Lapointe. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is for Ms. Yedlin. From a business perspective, can you tell us how the federal government's purchase of the TMX pipeline has contributed to job stability and business confidence in Canada's energy sector?
Certainly. I mean, the purchase of the pipeline has provided certainty in terms of getting the project across the finish line, because we know that Kinder Morgan was not going to proceed with the project on its own. And that was due to the regulatory challenges that were consistently put in front of the company. And they needed to make a decision, as Mr. Legg just pointed out. Companies in the energy space have the opportunity to make investments all over the world. We compete with the world for investment dollars. And without this certainty, this project would not have been built, and Canada would have lost, as I said in my comments. The opportunity cost of this not being built would have been significant. And so this was the only way it was going to get across the finish line. And it's unfortunate, but it really was the regulatory challenges and the fact that Kinder Morgan had to think about looking elsewhere in terms of its investment opportunities.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Leger. Your organization has done some incredible work towards securing long-term economic growth in your province. How do you see the TMX pipeline fitting into Alberta and also Canada's broader strategy to transition toward clean energy, all while maintaining competitiveness in the global market?
Well, the expansion provides the opportunity for the sector to continue to grow and flourish and provide good jobs and economic contributions, not only for the province of Alberta, but for the country as a whole, generate government revenues. And as many of my members in the energy sector will tell you, is that continued growth and operation of their companies and their plans is integral to supporting cleaner investments into whether it's carbon capture and storage or looking into the hydrogen economy. We simply can't cut off that sector in terms of its capital flows, its investment flows, its revenues. And so this continues to enable them to operate successfully and begin to move additional funds into some of these newer technologies that will help reduce emissions as a sector and as a country.
Thank you. Mr. Strickland, I appreciated the experience you shared in your opening statements of your members in the construction. Can you tell us how the experience you gained during from building such a large-scale project like the TMX pipeline, how can that experience be leveraged to accelerate Canada's clean energy transition, and what role can the federal government play in facilitating the transition for your members?
Well, I think many of the skills that are involved with constructing a pipeline are transferable. So when we talk about our energy transition to hydrogen, carbon sequestration, small modular reactors, et cetera, the welding, the earth moving are transferable, but we're going to need some additional training for these new energy sources of the future. Our industry has been around for hundreds of years, and we constantly evolve and adapt to new technologies, but every now and again, we're going to need some help from the federal government with training dollars to help position us for those new energy sources of the future. If I might add as well, when I hear about regulatory certainty, I think that's important for these major infrastructure projects, but it's not a race to the bottom. I think what we need is regulatory efficiency. So we have so many permitting bodies, so many different agencies that are involved, cross-ministerial, cross-departmental, intergovernment, for these major infrastructure projects like this and for the new ones to help us transition to a net zero carbon economy. We need to achieve that regulatory efficiency across all of those different government bodies so that we get these projects out of the ground quicker and get them to market.
Thank you. Back to you, Ms. Yedlin. How do you see the pipeline balancing the need for economic growth with the ongoing efforts to transition to clean energy across Canada?
There's no transition to clean energy without the involvement of the energy sector. And so as already been pointed out, you have revenues that can be applied to technologies and processes that continue to decrease emissions. And I would argue that that's something that we have to consider. And it's also something that, we need decarbonization policies that are also balancing both economic and environmental goals. And they must be structured in a manner that recognize that this is a long cycle investment timeframe, which goes back to how I originally started speaking. We are too focused on the short term. This is a long cycle. These are long cycle investments. There's no switch. We can't go from system A to system B, and it has to be done in a thoughtful way so that we decarbonize and don't compromise our economic opportunities at the same time. policies have to have certainty, and we have to understand what those look like in order to make those investments going forward.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We'll now go to Monsieur Soumard for 6 minutes.
Merci, Georges. Je vais prendre quelques minutes et puis j'espère pouvoir revenir rapidement aux témoins. Je vais prendre quelques minutes pour apporter une motion, sachant... Ah, voilà. C'est l'histoire de ma vie.
It's the story of my life. It's Okay, thank you. I'll start over. I'll take a few moments and I will apologize to the witnesses. I'm going to take a few minutes to propose a motion. I received, through email, some discussions with the PBO. The update that they've conducted on the Trans Mountain Review is going to be completed fairly shortly, and they will be able to table it, perhaps a hard copy in the beginning of November. And the parliamentary budget officer will be ready to appear before the committee and present his report orally. So I'd like to move the following motion: that the committee invite the parliamentary budget officer to appear before the end of report of the study, a mountain pipeline study, to share the findings of his update. Straightforward. I don't think that we should sacrifice a discussion with his update on his final latest, because before that his previous report was in 2022 and it was at $12 billion and now we're at $30+ billion. So his opinion at that time was that the project was not viable. So at 34 billion, it might even be less viable or questionable vis-a-vis the taxpayer. However, I think that this is completely in accordance and quite ready to be improved with our thing.
Merci, Monsieur.
We do have a motion on the floor, so we will go to the proceedings of the motion, and we'll get back to you hopefully very soon. So if you could wait patiently and as we deal with the motion. So there is a motion on the floor. I think everybody's heard it and understands it. Just want to double check. There's no debate on the motion. If there's no, Ms. Stubbs, go.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
Ms. Goodrich. Go ahead.
Yeah. I just want to say, of course, we support the colleagues' motion to get this transparency and accountability that Canadians deserve. We, of course, absolutely support the Trans Mountain expansion, as we have done consistently, and recognize the importance of energy transportation infrastructure to every single community across the country. But certainly, Canadians deserve to have this review and get these answers, and so support my colleagues. We Conservatives support our colleagues' motion.
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. I'm going to go to Ms. Goodridge, and then I'll go to the other speakers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, et merci beaucoup à mon collègue.
Thank you very much to my colleague across the way for proposing a motion that is absolutely pertinent. We have to express some accountability to the taxpayer, and as the other colleague said, we should be looking at all the information we can get.
Thank you, Ms. Goodridge. I'm going to go to Mr. Angus. Mr. Angus, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Chair. Certainly, the reason I brought the motion on TMX is because we have to get answers that we're paying $37 billion, $34 billion to build this. The fact that we're being asked to subsidize every barrel that goes down the pipe by companies that continue to rise emissions. So we need to get answers. Canadians want answers, and boosterism isn't an answer. We need facts. So the parliamentary budget officer said there is no business case. He needs to come and explain to us, because it's our job is to hear the testimony, prepare the testimony, and prepare a report for Parliament so that Canadians can make up their minds. So I certainly support my colleague.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Angus. I'm going to go to Mr. Bruson. Go ahead, Mr. Bruson.
I'll be fast just so we can get to the witnesses, but I agree with the motion, and I think that we'd actually talked about that when the PBO was here the first time. So I'm in agreement with Mr. Simar's proposed motion.
Okay, I don't see any more speakers, so let's call the vote. No, there's agreement, unanimous consent by the looks of it. Yeah, okay, it's unanimous. That's great. Thank you. Motion passes. Okay, thank you. Mr. Smart, I'm back to you. You got about a minute.
Le Québec fait l'unanimité.
Well, Quebec is also unanimous in agreement, so that's fantastic. I would have a short, very rapid question for Ms. Yedlin. And you can hear me well? Okay, thank you. In a previous answer, you indicated that we need certainty, foreseeability for getting these projects done, and that the regulatory scheme in Canada is far too complicated. I think in the capitalist world, there's a basic premise that private enterprise is willing to take risks. But sometimes it seems that the state should take the risk, particularly the larger the problem. The larger the project, the greater the risk. Now, no one knows exactly how to improve our management of emission gases without the help of the government. It seems that no one in the private market is prepared to assume that risk. Is Canadian petroleum profitable?
But we also need to have the underlying policy certainty that is straightforward and not layered by other policies. So right now, the energy sector is profitable. I'll just put one thing in front of you. In there was a time when the price of oil was $8.64 a barrel in 1998. And it took till 2005 before oil hit $60 a barrel for the oil sands companies and for the energy sector to start making some money. Okay. And so now, without policy certainty and without, if you have regulatory pieces.
Je vous remercie de votre réponse. Je ferai simplement.
I thank you for your answer, but at $34 billion, that's security in the highest cost we've ever seen.
We'll now go to.
Can I just make one point? In 1971, the government of Ontario, the federal government, and the government of Alberta came together to support the ongoing development of Syncrude. And at that time, the C.D. Howe Institute said that this was exactly the time for government to step in and share the risk to ensure the viability of the project. I would argue the same thing has happened today.
Thank you, Ms. Yedlin. We will now go to Mr. Angus for 6 minutes. Mr. Angus, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. I'll start with Calgary Chamber of Commerce. I'm sure you're aware of the Calgary economic development study that was done, the Alberta Energy Transition Study of 2021. Do you remember that?
I'm sure I do.
Oh, good. Because I remember in 2022 being in Alberta and there was so much excitement because, I mean, you are an energy capital. Nobody's got the kind of skill that Alberta has. I'm saying that my wife's an Albertan. The old man worked in the oil patch. But in terms of being in there and talking about clean energy, nobody knows it like Alberta. And so the Calgary Economic Development Study done with Edmonton Global said they predicted there would be 170,000 jobs in clean tech in Alberta, contributing $61 billion to GDP by 2050 in that report. So I would think you'd want to read that one. And the interim president and CEO of Calgary Economic Development said that Calgary's vision is to be the destination of choice for innovators to solve the greatest global challenges, including the energy transition and the pursuit of net zero. How do your members feel about the moratorium brought in on renewables by Daniel Smith?
I think the question really is about how we move forward with policy certainty. So it's everything from investment tax credits to support.
Sorry,
carbon
that's not the
capture.
question. The question I asked is, how does your members feel about the moratorium? Because you represent many people who would have been beneficiaries of this massive investment in clean tech.
In fact, investment in the renewable sector has continued because there were projects underway. I think the uncertainty that has been created has caused people to sit on the sidelines. But that's not unlike what happens in any situation like this. Anytime there is regulatory uncertainty, dollars sit on the sidelines.
I agree with you. Sorry, I'm running out of time here. The issue of regulatory uncertainty is my concern here because there were 53 projects representing 8,600 megawatts of power that were shelved after the moratorium, 118 projects affected. They've counted at the Pembina Institute, I'm sure you read that study from August, that cost $33 billion with an additional $263 million per year of revenue in municipal and land taxes in 27 different municipalities that was lost. Now, we've heard from businesses who say they just don't think Alberta is a place to invest in because they don't know what the rules are going to be. We've spoken with clean tech people who go stateside. I mean, they're going to Texas, and, you know, I don't want to be mean, but Texas has got way more climate deniers than the UCP does, and yet our clean tech economy is going there. So without this regulatory certainty, what's happening right now in Alberta? What are your members telling you?
Our members are looking for certainty both from a provincial standpoint and from a federal standpoint. And I will say that there's a lot of money that has gone south of the border because of the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's been taking place. And so I want to support. I want to say that we need to have the underlying certainty to support investment, and that is what we're asking for both federally and provincially.
Thank you so much. Certainly what we've lost to Biden with the Inflation Reduction Act and our lack of action. And I'm still waiting on my Liberal friends over there to get those tax credits moving. But we've heard a lot of great talk, but we can't lose these jobs. And I certainly don't want to see them lose out of Alberta. Mr. Leger, I just want to ask you, you talked about the need to close the gap, which would be, did you say $9 a barrel that TMX allows us to do?
There's an estimate of differential, yes.
Yeah. Because what we heard from TMX Corporation the other day is that they said that the barrels going down the tube right now are being subsidized by $13 a barrel. So I'm thinking, okay, if this is such a great project, why do we have to pay the oil giants $13 a barrel to ship through taxpayers' money? How is that financially, how does that make sense?
I can't speak to the toll structure. That's not an area of expertise of mine. What the construction of the pipeline does is enable Canadian product to get more global prices, which means Canadian producers can earn more and generate more jobs and investment and revenues to governments as a result.
I certainly get that. I guess my question is that the oil giants right now say that they don't like the tolls. They think they're having to pay too much. When they're paying 48% of the toll, which means 52%, $13 a barrel is being paid by who? The public? I don't know, debt. I don't know any business on the planet that subsidizes an industry like that. And so the reason I asked the question is that it's been this Simon Fraser study on this that just came out, I'm sure you read it, is tagged as subsidy at between $581 to $1,248 per household. So I'm being told this is a nation building project, well, certainly because everybody in the nation is paying up to $1,250 per household to run this bitumen down that pipeline, while Suncor is getting it at a discount of over 50%. Can you explain to me the mathematics of 21st century capitalism, if that's how it works?
I can't speak to the specific Simon Fraser study you're referencing, nor can I speak to the
Well, then, do you think they should pay their way? I mean, if this is such an important industry, if it's so profitable, do you think that they should pay the full share? This is how industry's done. This is how it's always been done. The tolls pay for the cost, right? Shouldn't they not pay the cost?
I would argue that the bigger picture needs to be viewed in the sense that there's a lot of economic benefit that happens from the entire value chain, supply chain, and government revenues.
Subsidy,
and that,
$13 a barrel. What you're telling me is that this is not an industry that can make it on its own if we have to do $13 a barrel
Ranks,
subsidy. Thank you.
Time is up. Thank you. Miss Stubbs, I'll turn it over to you for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to cede to my colleague Jeremy, but I just, of course, wanted to correct some of the facts from our esteemed colleague MP Angus. Alberta, of course, has long been and remains the far and away leader in clean tech investment and alternative renewable energy development, including before and after the pause by the provincial government, which was deliberately designed to work out the regulatory details, provide certainty and confidence so that Albertans, the government could be confident that Albertans could get to yes and be confident with all of the new development. But that is nothing new in Alberta, particularly among the traditional energy companies, which as a sector in this country for private sector investment in clean tech are far and away the private sector leaders on investment in clean tech right across Canada. Jeremy will continue with questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I guess maybe just building off of that quickly, Mrs. Yedlin, was it a good idea to provide certainty by the Alberta government for investors and for Albertans?
Absolutely. I mean, like I said before, you can't expect anybody to invest a dollar in anything without providing certainty. People don't risk capital on a promise. They risk capital on certainty. And that's what we need in order to move forward, regardless of the industry that you're in.
Yeah, exactly. So you were in your opening remarks and a different round, you talked a little bit about how an emissions cap would be a production cap. You kind of had a short time frame to address. So I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit more about how damaging and harmful that would be to, the future viability of this project, but also any other projects that can and will and should be built in this country. But if we have an emissions cap in place, what would that mean to any future project?
It means that there would not be investment in future projects. And I also think it's worth mentioning that the emissions cap will do nothing in terms of addressing global emissions. We are still a very, very small part of the global emissions picture. And having an emissions cap in Alberta, which would constrain oil production and natural gas production, would contribute absolutely nothing to decreasing the emissions on a global standpoint. So why compromise our economy and the potential for adding more infrastructure to support the most productive industry in the country by having an emissions cap? It makes no sense.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the only government in the world that has one in place, and they seem to be bragging about how amazing it is. But you've laid out quite clearly here the damage that it would bring. I just quickly on the tolls. In your opening remark, you mentioned there'd be about $9 billion of value in the tolls. I'm just wondering, what number were you using for that to come to that conclusion on what the toll would be?
So it's $11 a barrel. And so it's about 30% of the cost overages, or about $9 billion, are expected to be covered by the producers through the toll.
Okay, but I was just going to say the CER hasn't actually made that official yet, correct?
There's a hearing in May of next year.
In May of next year, okay.
But until those tolls are decided, the valuation of the asset itself is going to remain uncertain until we know what that number is.
Right.
Wow. Okay. Just wondering on the impact assessment, maybe Mr. Legge, you were talking about that a little bit, about how the changes that the government made don't go far enough. I'm just wondering if you could just elaborate on that a little bit, because again, we're trying to find certainty here. That's what killed this project in the sense from the private sector building it, was a lack of certainty. And Conservatives tried to address that in the Atlantic Accord when that came through, because they still hadn't made any changes to it. And they were going to try pass a bill that had unconstitutional references to it. So we were trying to sort through that then. And as we know, the government of Alberta is challenging the constitutionality of the revised version of it. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what what more certainty is needed, I guess, or how we could still better fix the Impact Assessment Act, especially around standing and how that works.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Patzer. Our biggest concern is the ministerial designation powers and the political interference that can come with a decision, which was the result, which is why we saw Gateway canceled at the last minute. But one of the biggest concerns which you've raised is also the concept of standing. Any of the projects that go before the agency, any member of the public, whether they are near, far, directly, indirectly, or not even remotely impacted by the project, have the ability to weigh in on the impacts, and therefore changes to the act need to clarify that a sense of standing, that only those who are material and directly impacted have the ability to weigh in on the consultations.
Thank you. We'll now go to Ms. Jones for 5 minutes. Go ahead, Ms. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our guests for joining us today. I appreciate your feedback. I'm going to start with Ms. Yedlin. How does this project increase the competitiveness for Canada's energy in the world? I think that's been the catalyst for this entire project. And do you see it as infrastructure that is absolutely necessary to do that?
So I think it's really important to recognize that it improves Canada's energy security, but it accounts for 17% of total pipeline capacity. And what it means is that we become a more reliable supplier of oil, which is crucial for energy security, broadly speaking, around the world. We've seen the impact of what happens when there are geopolitical events. And if we can be a supplier that is reliable, and this is what this pipeline gives us the opportunity to really play a larger role on the global stage. That's where we can, that's why it's important.
Okay, thank you. So my next question is for Mr. Legge. Over the years, we've repeatedly saw bottlenecks in the supply chain, which seriously harmed the Alberta energy workers in particular, and the economic benefits of the energy industry. How does TMX alleviate these constraints today?
The TMX expansion enables further production growth to happen, so we can actually drive more jobs, more investment in the energy sector, and decrease some of the bottlenecks that were happening in terms of the supply getting to market. That is the biggest thing for Canada, is to get its product to market. We produce more than we consume domestically, and so finding new ways to build more access to international markets is an imperative so that we can enable the sector to grow. We can create more jobs and enable the sector to contribute more to Canadian prosperity.
Okay, so when we were discussing earlier, we talked about a number of factors about the economic benefits that this would bring to Canadians, to jobs, to the unions. Mr. Strickland, I just want to ask you, when the International Union of Operating Engineers came before our committee, they said they were only engaged in this project after the government had purchased TMX. Is that the same experience for your union workers as well with the building trades?
Yes, that's right. We weren't involved. The pipeline trades, the operators, the Teamsters, Layun, and the UA were not engaged early in the process. And for large infrastructure projects, it's much better if building trades are engaged earlier in the process. And that would have helped with planning labor force. It would have helped with planning the availability of labor force at different times throughout different locations of the pipeline project. And so we advocate for all large buyers of construction to engage early with contractors and unions so we can adequately supply the skilled trained labor that project requires.
Thank you. My next question is for Ms. Yedlin again. You once spoke about the importance of having a reliable infrastructure for energy. You disagreed that this project was necessary for us to have that energy security. So let me ask this question. Why was the project not built or approved when it was originally presented under the former Conservative Harper government?
So, the project was, it was filed in 2013. It was recommended that it be approved by the NEB. It was approved by the Prime Minister in 2016. The investment decision was announced in 2017 by Kinder Morgan. And then costs started to escalate because there was unreasonable regulatory risk. And that continued to move until the federal government decided that, Kinder Morgan suspended non-essential spending on the project in 2018, in April of 2018. There was too much regulatory uncertainty for them to proceed and continue to take that risk to get the project done. And that's what happened.
So part of the risk behind this project came from the British Columbia government,
Correct.
who were opposed to this, as well as other legal action by environmental groups. So you'd be aware of that.
Yes.
And one way to reduce that risk and reduce this environmental concern that was being expressed would be to lower the emissions in the oil and gas sector. So despite that, you oppose the emissions cap. I'm not sure what the other panelists feel about this, so I'd like to know. And while the oil and gas sector is increasing its emissions today, do you feel today that lowering these emissions in the sector is something that needs to happen and would help reduce the risk of projects being delayed by environmental concerns?
So I just
So
say,
Ms.
Ms. Yedlin, on a very short answer, if you could please, because we're just at time.
Emissions intensity per barrel has decreased 23% in the oil sands since 2009. So the companies themselves are decreasing emissions. And that continues. But I will say this, Bill C-59 is also going to compromise their ability to tell you about that because of the disclosure regulations associated with that bill.
Thank you.
All the truth.
We'll now go to Monsieur Simard for 2.5 minutes. Monsieur Simard, the floor is yours.
Oh, pardon. J'étais occupé.
Okay, I was looking at something very important in the background there. I have a few questions, short and quick, Ms. Yedlin. In reply to a colleague, something clicked in my mind, and I'd like to ask you, do you believe that there's any economy depending on high carbon intensity sector, and the intention is there to reduce? You'll understand in a moment here. You seem to be wondering a bit there, so I'll give you a hint. Industrial sectors, which consume a lot of energy, are currently seeking, particularly in Germany, where they may source low-intensity energy, or clean energy. I'm talking about very heavy industry, that sector. They don't want to go to Alberta, where there's a lot of petroleum available, abundantly available. And if they don't want to come where there's heavy carbon intensity in the area, there must be a reason why they're not coming there. I think in the long term, we are deserting the Alberta community by depending solely on energy, on petroleum, because it's the demand is decreasing. You said you don't see why there should be a cap because this goes against the interests of Alberta, but perhaps the interest by other partners or other parts of Canada don't depend on high-intensity carbon emissions in Quebec, for example.
To answer your question with the following, we know that the German Chancellor was interested in finding ways to source LNG, liquefied natural gas, from Canada to Germany. That was not seen to be a priority.
Non, c'est pas le cas.
No, that's not the case. I'm sorry, but it's not the case. No.
So we know
Go ahead, Ms. Yedlin.
LNG is being asked. They would like to source it for Asian economies, South Korea, Japan. So I would argue that your reasoning, sir, is flawed, and that we are moving as an industry. The energy sector is investing. It is the largest investor in clean tech in the country, moving to decarbonize. And we also know that our LNG should be exported around the world. And we know that people are asking for it. The problem is we don't have the infrastructure. We have one project.
Thank you.
Our natural gas gets transported down to the United States and then it gets exported as LNG.
Thank you, Ms. Yedlin. We'll now go to Mr. Angus for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to follow up on my colleague. I did meet the German Chancellor last year in Berlin, and he told us they were not interested in Canada's LNG at all. He said they wanted to know if Canada could provide them with clean energy, but then he asked us if we had stable and non-conspiracy driven governments. And I was saying, well, I think maybe, but we'll have to see. But that's not the reason I'm mentioning this. Last summer, as 200,000 people fled their homes from climate fires, Rich Kruger from Suncor CEO made a statement that there was a state of emergency, that the industry had to make even more money and expand production as people were fleeing. And I was thinking, God, that is so, the disconnect. And this summer when Jasper burned, what a tragedy. And we had Cenovus CEO John McKenzie here, and I asked him if he believed there was a connection between fossil fuel burning and the climate crisis. And he didn't believe one. He didn't know. And I thought, well, that's wild given all the lawsuits industry is facing and all the science. And what I haven't heard from anybody here is a mention of environment or climate obligations. I didn't hear it from our CEOs. I haven't heard a few, but you did mention atmospheric rivers and wildfires and how you managed to get past that. So simple question for each of you. Do you believe there is a direct link between fossil fuel burning and the climate crisis that is hitting our communities across the country? Mr. Legge? Is there a connection?
I think the science is far too difficult to determine, particularly when it comes to forest fires and natural disasters.
Okay, thank you.
that
Ms.
are-
Yedlin, do you believe the science, is it too difficult for you, or do you believe there's a connection?
Chair, could the witness actually finish his comment there?
Sorry.
Because
I only
there
have two
are
and a half
facts
Okay,
about the
so
forest
we are,
fires.
actually, we are at the end of time.
Can I just get them to just say yes or no?
You can
Simple.
finish
Yes
off
or
with
no?
that, please.
Is there a connection, Ms. Yedlin?
This is a multifactorial issue. It's not just, there's not an A then B connection.
So there is no
There are
connection
many
between
fac-
fossil
there
fuel
are
burning? You
many-
don't know.
there are-
Mr. Strickland, do you
many
know if there's a connection, or is this just like
Point
too
of order.
complex for you too?
Okay,
Yes or no?
I'm going to ask
No?
colleagues.
Okay, complex.
Mr. Angus, I'm asking you to hold. We have a point of order by Ms. Stubbs. Oh, sorry, Ms. Goodrich. My apologies.
So we maybe look the same. Yeah, no, we all look the same. Anyways, point of order. I appreciate that Mr. Angus might not want to hear the response, but I believe interrupting the witnesses after he gave very long questions is disrespectful, especially speaking over powerful women that are simply trying to get their answer.
Fair enough. Point of order, Chair? I
yes.
agree. I agree. I'm more than willing to give them as much time as they want to talk. I won't say another word. Can you tell me if you believe the science of climate change?
Mr. Angus,
does
I'm gonna,
Alberta
Mr.
Chamber of
Angus,
Commerce does? I'll stop talking. Let them talk.
I'll need you to stop.
I'm more,
I'll need you to stop because there is a point of order by Ms. Goodrich and yourself, and I will just ask.
I'm letting them talk.
Everybody around the table here. If you ask a question, allow the witnesses to have the opportunity to provide an answer, even though if it's a brief answer, an answer, and let's not try to interrupt or talk over each other just to keep the committee running smoothly as it has been over several meetings. I thank you for your cooperation, Ms. Goodrich. Thank you for your highlighting that, and you as well, Mr. Angus. On a point of order, go ahead.
Yeah, because I certainly don't want to seem like a hard guy. I love Calgary. I spent a lot of time. I love Edmonton. My wife's from there. So I would ask my not, I didn't want to be rude. I only get 2.5 minutes.
Your time's
So
actually up.
I know. This is my point of order. Would they be willing to write, like other witnesses, to
And I
tell
hate
us
to
if
say
they
this, but
believe?
oil and gas
They
development isn't
can,
actually
if they
in
want to
Edmonton
engage
and
on whether they
Calgary
believe in
itself.
climate science, they
You
could
could've
write
just
to the
let Ms.
committee and we can see. That way,
Ms.
I haven't
Yedlin and
interrupted
Adam
them.
answer the
Mr. Angus, not a point of order, but your point of clarification is to the witnesses, if you so choose to write and would like to provide additional brief on anything you've provided today you may have missed, or you'd like to add any extra context or information, you are able to do so by sending it directly to the clerk. But we are out of time on that round of questioning, and I want to go to our next speaker, and that's Mr. Falk.
How long, sir?
You have 5 minutes, Mr. Falk.
Well,
so ask away.
You're generous today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you to all our witnesses. And, I took a quick look at your bios a few minutes ago, and I didn't see scientist on any one of them. So if you're being asked scientific questions and you don't have an answer, that's totally understandable. But I did know, Ms. Yedlin, that you do have a degree in economics and you do have an MBA. And so I do want to ask you some questions about money. How did we get to $34 billion? That was really the intent of the study. How did we get to $34 billion from what should have been $12 billion at the outset? Well, and if you go right back to the outset, it was $9.7 billion. But I know we've heard all kinds of things, but in your opinion, have you had the time to study it, and could you give us what you believe cost the extra money?
Well, I think, there were delays, for one thing. The fact that the project had to be, that the approvals had to be, that were withdrawn, the scope was changed. There was a lot of technical issues that had to be addressed. There was a pandemic. There were some other environmental unforeseen issues. There were a lot of, as economists would say, there were a lot of exogenous variables that contributed to the rising costs, supply chain issues, work stoppages, the challenges, in terms of dealing with the protests. And also there was meaningful consultation that took place with 130 Indigenous communities. All of this took time, and time is money. And unfortunately, this is the number that we've come to for the project. But I do believe that the valuation is going to be such that we will capture the value of the project over time, and it will have been worth the dollars that were spent to buy the pipeline.
Thank you. At our last meeting, we had the CEO of Mr. Mackey of the TMX with us, and he indicated he was very committed to being a disciplined seller, and that the Canadian taxpayer would get 100% return on their investment. Can you tell me what the toll would have to be to get 100% return on $34 billion? And I know there's lots of variables. I totally understand that. We saw a 0.5% interest drop today from the Bank of Canada, which will have a huge impact. But do you have a ballpark number, a range?
I'm not an expert in tolls. I had a finance professor who was a witness at the Ontario Energy Board on tolls. I'm not an expert on tolls, and I don't know what that number should be, but I do know that whatever, when you think about what companies were having to do in order to ship their barrels south of the border, and between $15 and $22 US a barrel by rail, which also takes longer, is something that the industry had to deal with. And so, I think that we're going to be looking at the tolls that will be decided by the CER. Obviously, there'll be a lot of pushback on both sides, but I think that it's a function of the revenues it's going to generate. It's also a function of the value it's going to add. And, the right buyer is going to see a return on that investment because it's going to generate cash.
Mr. Legge, you have previously written articles in the Calgary Sun and other periodicals on your opinion of the production cap or emissions cap. Can you expand on that for this committee, please?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We are firmly opposed to the proposed oil and gas emissions cap. It is unnecessary regulation. It would put Canada in an uncompetitive position, curtail investment in the sector, and ultimately would result in lower economic activity, productivity, and prosperity for Canadians. It is a poorly thought regulation, and we've asked government to scrap it.
You also comment on what an emissions cap would do to the valuation of the pipeline.
I don't necessarily have the specific numbers around that, but ultimately, if we can't produce as much as we have potential for in the country, we can't ship it. Therefore, we're not going to generate the revenues, the royalties, the jobs, and the investment associated with it. So it would materially affect the valuation of the pipeline in a negative way.
Good. Thank you very much. Mr. Strickland, we've been told previously during this study that contractors were replaced at the outset of the project with unionized Canadian workers. Can you tell me why this was done and what benefit Canadians received?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. The main reason was that the contract model from the outset was awarded to one contractor for the entire spread of the project, and would have been better to diversify your contractor pool for that length of the project at 890 kilometers. And also at the same time, you had tight labor markets with Site C underway, LNG Canada, Coastal GasLink. And so it would have been much more advisable for the project proponents to sit down and work with the Pipeline Contractors Association and unionized contractors to figure out how we can get our members deployed from across the country to better deliver and construct that pipeline.
Thank you, Mr. Strickland. And
Mr. Falk, your time
I was going to follow up.
Okay. Your time is up. Okay. Your time is up. Somebody else can ask, or you can follow up later. Thank you. We are now going to go to Mr. Bruson. Mr. Bruson, you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to move to resume debate on the motion that I had brought and that we were unable to complete our debate on in the last meeting.
Point of order.
I am going to.
We have a point of order. I'm going to ask you to hold 1 second. But first, before we speak, we're going to go to a point of order.
Oh, thank you. It's just, and I think that this motion's important, but we've had great testimony from our witnesses. I think out of respect to them, they don't need to sit here and listen to us debate a motion. Why don't we? Can we ask
Since all those witnesses are Albertans, I think they absolutely deserve to stay and witness
Thank
this
you.
debate.
It is a dilatory motion. The clerks told me we have to put it right to a vote. So to resume debate, put it to a vote, please.
Can we have her read the motion into the record before we?
Oh, okay.
Before we vote.
Well, the motion is merely.
Doesn't matter. She has to. It's about resuming.
So, the motion is to resume debate. You've put it, we're going to a vote. Go ahead, please.
Okay. The question is to resume debate on the adjourned motion as amended. Mr. Bruson.
Yes.
Ms. Jones.
Yes.
Mr. Jahauri. Yes. Madame Lapointe.
Oui.
Mr. Scheifke.
Oui.
Mr. Dreeshen.
No.
Mr. Falk.
No.
Mr. Patzer.
No.
Ms. Stubbs.
No.
Monsieur Simard.
Oui.
Mr. Angus.
We.
That is 7 yeas, 4 nays. Motion is adopted.
The motion is adopted, so we will resume debate. Sorry.
And that just proves how much they really want to hear from
I'm
witnesses.
going to ask, sorry,
Point
Mr.
of order, Mr. Chair?
Yes, on a point of order, Ms. Jones.
I have to say, I have sit in this room with Ms. Stubbs and the opposition bench when we've had witnesses on the screen that we never got to ask not one question to them or have any feedback. So I resent the fact that this evening she's making an unfair accusation when she did this many times and shut down our committee to witnesses that
Ms.
were
Jones,
Thank you, colleague, for your comments. And I apologize if you felt that way. Thanks
Ms.
for your
Stubbs,
point.
I'll ask you just to, so colleagues, the cross chatter, cross debate, interrupting each other, let's avoid that so we can continue on and ensure that things run smoothly here today. Okay. Now, my apologies. I'm just gonna, Mr. Angus, before we went to a vote, I want to go back to you. You had a point of order. Was that to release the witnesses? You wanted to, was that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, I think they've given us a lot of their time and their expertise. For them to have to sit and watch us, beat each other with cardboard sticks is probably, they've got better things to do. So I think in fairness, our witnesses should be able to get on with their important work, and we'll carry on with our committee work.
Okay, thank you. You have a point of order, Mr. Dreeshen.
I would like the witnesses to stay as long as they possibly can. It would be very important for them to hear what is being presented, that the debate is going to take place. So I would welcome them to continue to stay as long as they possibly could so that they could understand what it is that is going on here. Thank you.
So what I will say to the witnesses online, just so you know what's going on, we have a motion that's been moved on the floor. If you so choose to remain for the rest of the meeting for allotted time, you can do so. You're welcome to stay. If the motion does pass, we would come back to you, but the motion also could continue. There's no timeline to that. I will leave it up to you, witnesses, to decide what you'd like to do. And you can proceed from there. The only thing I would mention, if there is anything, Mr. Strickland, Mr. Legg, and Ms. Yedlin, that you may have missed in today's meeting on answering, you don't feel like you were able to give a complete answer, you can provide a briefing to the clerk and send that in directly. I hope that clarifies procedurally where we're at in today's meeting. I do want to thank you if you do choose to leave, for taking your time to providing testimony, important testimony at our study, and I look forward to seeing you again. So I'll leave that up to you, and thank you so much. Okay, so now we're going to go to Mr. Bruson. The motion's on the floor, Mr. Bruson, and you have the floor. Please continue.
Alors, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. As you know, this motion was suspended over the last meeting. I've modified the wording of it a little bit. Given that there are 1,600 abandoned and orphaned oil wells in Alberta, polluting farmland, waterways, and air, the number of these should be reduced, or have been, or set to increase by an additional 1,800 to 2,000 at a cost of $200 million to clean up. The government of Alberta sent back $137 million because they failed to use the funds provided by the government of Canada to clean up abandoned wells and create jobs during the pandemic. The government of Saskatchewan used their allotted funds in their entirety to clean abandoned wells and create jobs. Companies who abandon wells and fail to pay for their cleanup negatively impact provincial taxpayers and municipalities. Orphaned and abandoned wells present an economic opportunity to support energy solutions like geothermal energy. The Standing Committee of Natural Resources should begin a 5-meeting study on the impact of failure to clear these wells in Alberta, the impacts of pollution of not cleaning up the abandoned and orphaned wells, the costs of cleaning up abandoned and orphaned wells, the regulations to hold companies to account for well cleanup, and the potential opportunities associated with the cleaning up of abandoned wells, and report its findings to the House of Commons. Now, that's my motion. I think I've already presented my rationale for this motion. What I've heard in the past is that it's a significant and important issue. So perhaps we could vote on this as quickly as possible.
Sorry, Ms. Goodrich.
Thank you. I was just wondering if we could have the motion circulated in both official languages to members.
Thank you, Ms. Goodrich, for that suggestion. It has been circulated, and the clerk can send you a copy, so you do have it. Okay. Mr. Bruson, you're done? Okay, just want to make sure. I want to go to you, Ms. Stubbs. You have the floor.
Thanks, Sharon. Certainly fair comment and request from my colleague Leila, since she's not a permanent member of this committee and is joining us today. We did discuss this issue at last meeting, And I, of course, as an Albertan, expressed how, and a person who lives among and with resource development, have expressed that Albertans have long cared about this issue, and that all Albertans who live near and with and around resource development great benefit of our own communities, of Indigenous communities, and the great significant outsized benefits to the entire country are all concerned with these issues. So since this motion was made, of course, the Alberta government did respond. So I would just read that into the record so that, of course, people can hear. So the Minister of Energy from the Government of Alberta said, quote, "The motion being debated by the Standing Committee on Natural Resources earlier today was factually wrong and frankly nonsensical. It's extremely concerning that Liberal and New Democrat members of Parliament sitting on the Natural Resources Committee don't appear to understand what an abandoned well is. For their enlightenment, a properly abandoned well is a good thing. It means the well has been properly decommissioned and does not pose risk of polluting any land. You would think that an MP sitting on the particular committee would know something about the industry they and their staff are supposed to monitor." He went on, "The Liberals and the NDP need to get their facts straight before setting forth on these expeditions to shame Alberta. Alberta is properly decommissioning more wells than ever before. We're also remediating and reclaiming oil and gas sites faster than ever. Over the last 5 years, the Orphan Well Association, which looks after cleaning up wells and sites belonging to bankrupt companies, decommissioned more wells and completed more reclamation projects than any other time in their history. The old WEA fully closed 622 sites in 2023-24, up 44% from the year before. Further, every single dollar of federal funding through the site rehabilitation program was committed to be spent, and the Alberta government successfully spent about $864 million of the $1 billion provided. The Alberta government says it fought hard for 2 years with the backing of 17 First Nations chiefs for an extension to allow private industry and Indigenous companies to clean up wells on reserve. And that, of course, colleagues, as we all know, is distinctly, explicitly, and solely federal jurisdiction. So he says, "We fought hard for 2 years with backing of 17 First Nations chiefs for an extension to allow private industry and Indigenous companies to clean up wells on reserve, which happened to be the responsibility of the federal government. These funds would have been spent for remediation on First Nations land, but Ottawa refused. We reluctantly returned the remainder of the funds when we had no other choice. This is an issue that has been kicked down the road by previous governments of all stripes. Alberta has a premier and an energy minister with the courage to prioritize fixing this problem, and that is what we will do. NDP and Liberal MPs who end up demonstrating their ignorance in an effort to score political points do nothing to move this important work forward." And I would, of course, remind colleagues of also what I said in this first debate, which is that in 2020, I think it was, or earlier, I, on behalf of all Conservatives, put forward Bill C-221, the Environmental Restoration Incentive Act, which would have allowed the creation of a tax credit for flow-through share provisions for small and medium-sized oil and gas producers who could no longer access capital because as a result of the Redwater Supreme Court decision. That bill had a sunset clause on it. It deliberately targeted producers of 100,000 barrels per day or less, and that was actually a potential real federal tool, not interfering in provincial jurisdiction, which all of this actually is, except for the wells on First Nations. And of course, colleagues, as I reminded everyone, I know it might have made strange bedfellows, but of course, the Conservatives, common sense Conservatives supported that bill. So did members of the Bloc, the Green and the NDP. And in fact, it was the Liberal government that defeated that bill. And that was actually an applicable, surgical, targeted, sunset-claused tool that could have helped for access to capital for companies that were literally going bankrupt because of the anti-private sector, anti-energy decade of darkness over which this government has presided, leading to situations that deeply concerned Albertans all across the province. But of course, I also brought that forward because this is not only a challenge in Alberta. The recovery of wells are significant throughout the country, especially I would note in southern Ontario. So that, of course, is why I had brought that forward at that point. Which would have actually just allowed more further capital in the private sector to complete their requirements of environmental remediation, which of course is exactly what Albertans and every Canadian expects when their resources are developed, because that's the social contract with proponents, that they can develop these resources to the grand benefit of a province, and in this case of the entire country, but they must meet their environmental remediation, reclamation, and expectations after that. That's, of course, in part why Alberta is the first jurisdiction in all of North America to set targets for emissions reductions, to report on them, to monitor them, and including an innovative tool more than 17 years ago that actually is an example of revenue going from private sector companies directly into innovation and clean tech, unlike the models that others have experimented with since. Now, on the subject of this motion, of course, as you all know, I represent 9 Indigenous communities, very proud to do so in Lakeland. And just as is the story of Alberta and the relationships between Indigenous companies and Indigenous leaders and Indigenous community members and private sector proponents who develop resources in Alberta, those partnerships have been long-standing. And it is so inspiring to see so many of the Indigenous leaders and entrepreneurs speaking out more and more about the benefit, and they do so also, by the way, in major challenges to do that. And so what champions they are for the best interests of their communities, which actually in this case also serve the best interests of all Canadians. So to the point of my colleague's motion, here is what I would like to read from the Treaty 6, 7, and 8 First Nations, the ones that represent all of the First Nations communities across Canada, across Alberta, on this exact issue. Well, there is a letter, of course, by the unanimous decision among chiefs to tell the federal government to ensure that extension and make sure that the money could be spent in their communities. So let me just read the last paragraph in particular. Quote, and this is from the chief of Treaty 7, but it should be noted that the chiefs of all Treaty 7, 6, and 8 are in support of this. So what his letter says is, in closing, the chiefs have united in calling for a government of Canada to transfer the $134 million held by Alberta to the FNSRP in order for us to continue the extraordinary work and economic benefits to Treaty 6, 7, and 8 nations in Alberta. We ask that you set political considerations aside to rekindle the spirit of collaboration and to do the right thing for the environment, for First Nation economies, and for the lands that our nations hold sacred. We implore your government to work with Alberta to ensure that the $134 million is made available to the First Nations who require these funds to continue this work. That, of course, letter was dated December 20th, 2023, and the clarification statement that the government of Alberta put out in response to the initiation of this motion this week, of course, also says, as I already read, but perhaps it bears repeating because there seems to be so many misunderstandings here, even when the facts and truths are spoken straight up. Every single dollar of federal funding through the site rehabilitation program was committed to be spent, and we successfully spent about $864 million of the $1 billion provided. We fought hard for 2 years with the backing of 17 First Nations chiefs for an extension to allow private industry and Indigenous companies to clean up wells on reserve, which happened to be the responsibility of the federal government. These funds would have been spent for remediation on First Nations land, but Ottawa refused. We reluctantly returned the remainder of the funds when we had no other choice. So if my NDP Liberal colleagues really want to debate this motion on this issue, in particular on their federal responsibility and the way that they have failed First Nations people, who I and all the Alberta representatives across our province proudly represent, just as we do every single other non-Indigenous Canadian in our communities, we proudly represent the Métis people and the First Nations and all of the diverse communities who live and work and have helped build our provinces with private sector proponents to develop our resources responsibly and effectively, matched second to none by any energy producing jurisdiction in the world, long before this government came into power, and agonizingly, it seems, long and dark 9 years ago. So if my colleagues want to have this debate, first of all, Chair, we asked you to provide us the schedule up until Christmas on our dates so that we can demonstrate to Canadians that we're actually going to get our job done here, that we're not just going to sit around and be like, oh, there's a bunch of studies, a bunch of reports. We haven't actually done anything. Let's now go on to this study, and which is exactly why Canadians are losing confidence and trust and faith in politicians and in bureaucracies and in government and in parliamentary committees, because we sit here and we study the same things over and over. We put the same reports over and over. Stakeholders participate in good faith like these people here today and all others. Well, Ted Falk and I sat on this committee when we already issued and did the study on electricity. This government hasn't been able to get the interties done. And here we were now back here on this committee doing the study again to put out yet another report, and the government doesn't even have like the first things first yet, as is the case on almost every single thing they do and say. So, colleagues, we certainly support having this debate, and we certainly support setting the record straight. And we certainly support that every single Canadian is probably concerned about these issues in all of their communities and all of their provinces right across the country. But again, members here cannot make an informed decision on whether or not to move forward to this study until, as we requested, we see the daily schedule and then actually agree to finish the work of previous studies, of ongoing studies, and get these reports out the door so Canadians can see that we're actually worth the paychecks that they give us and do our jobs. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Tubbs, I'll now go to Mr. Angus. Mr. Angus, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. As a follow-up to my colleague who worries that we're putting out all these reports, it is the role of committee to get testimony, to get witnesses across the different points of view, to come forward with recommendations to present to Parliament and then to the Canadian people so that they can make informed decisions. So in terms of our work schedule now, we are finishing, and I believe we have finished the electricity grid study, which we had really interesting testimony, which I hope will help move forward government policy. We are finishing TMX now. I believe outstanding. We want to hear from the Environment Minister, Mr. Wilkinson, the Natural Resources Minister, Deputy Prime Minister Friedland we've asked for, and my colleague Mr. Simard has asked for the PBO. I think that puts us in a good position to make recommendations. And, you know, the one thing about committees is we don't all have to agree on the recommendations. We can have minority reports, we can have contradictory information, but those reports are essential. That's what we do. So, from hearing from my Alberta colleague, she's more than willing to have a debate. I don't know what the debate's about. If all the evidence she has is that good, I'm up to having the witnesses. Let's look at this issue, because the issue of abandoned wells has been something that has been of concern. So we need to get numbers. The numbers are all over the map. I mean, I've crunched numbers on abandoned wells and federal liability, provincial liability, corporate liability. And it's incumbent upon us to get witnesses to come forward, and then we can explain to Canadians where we're at. I had agreed in the previous meeting that I felt that it was important to get where are abandoned wells across Canada, because we can compare jurisdictions. Certainly the first oil wells ever drilled were in southern Ontario and Petrolia. What is the situation there? We know that Saskatchewan, according to my colleague Mr. Bruson, had spent the money and dealt with theirs. Was there a difference between what Saskatchewan did and what Alberta did? At the end of the day, it is, for me coming from mining country, it's a fundamental. You have to clean up your mess. And no community has mess in mining like my community, because we are one of the first. Although I would point out that my honourable colleague, Ms. Lapointe, for decades, her industry was poisoning our lakes, and you know, we were pretty good natured about it, but we fortunately brought in changes that cut the sulfuric acid emissions coming out of the Sudbury stack, and now I believe the big stack's coming down, and they are actually more efficient than ever, and all that pollution that used to go up in the air for free is now captured and sold. So there are lessons to be learned. We set in the mining sector, we set rules for cleanup. We set rules for liability so that industries couldn't walk away, because that's a standard thing that used to always happen. They would take a mine, they would make the money, and then they would pitch it off to a junior company or shell company and then walk away. And the hills of Northern Ontario are full of those sites. You can't do that anymore. So the issue of what are the liability situations that we as taxpayers are on the hook for? Pretty straightforward. So given what I've heard from my colleague, Ms. Stubbs, I believe we should be ready to go ahead and vote on this. We are pretty much done the one study. We have 3 or 4 witnesses in the next. Pretty much done. So we can debate this forever, but I would actually think it would be good if Ms. Stubbs is really raring to go, ready for a fight, which she always is. Bring your witnesses. We'll get the witnesses. We'll get a cross section. We'll hear testimony, and then we'll make recommendations. And yes, we will create another report. That's what committees do. They create reports to Parliament and the people of Canada. So I'm ready to vote on this and move ahead, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. As you're ready, I think there's many others who aren't, because we have a list of speakers to go through. So we will go to our next speaker, Ms. Goodridge. Welcome to committee, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. It's wonderful to be here at Natural Resources Committee. It's a shame we had Alberta witnesses here talking about how TMX impacted not only my home province of Alberta, but also talking about some of the impacts to jobs in Ontario, in Quebec, and yet their testimony was cut short so that we can bring forward this motion and discuss it. And the part that frustrates me is it as an Albertan, and Mr. Chair, you're also an Albertan, so I'm not sure how you feel about the fact that this government continually attacks Alberta and singles Alberta out as if somehow everything would be fine if only Alberta did this, or if only Alberta did that. Because there are actually abandoned wells right across the country. There are abandoned wells in most provinces that have ever had oil. And yet we're not actually even talking about that. We're simply, this motion is only looking at Alberta. And this process that was brought forward, the $1.2 billion or $1.7 billion program, was brought in during COVID, and it was as much about job creation, as per an Auditor General's report from the province of Alberta, as it was about cleaning up orphaned wells. And there was some unique challenges that happened in the energy industry as a direct result of struggles around COVID. And so this was an innovative way of changing things up and making things a little bit differently. And I was actually an MLA at this point. And so this is where this becomes really interesting, because we had all kinds of conversations. And one of the things that Alberta did that was really interesting, but it wasn't as simple as perhaps what Saskatchewan's solution to this was working with the First Nations and having the First Nations site rehabilitation program. And the program really involved First Nations. It did things in a very innovative way, allowing them to be partners in prosperity. There were direct impacts to Indigenous communities, and it's interesting, I know at the government operations, they're currently looking at Indigenous procurement. The program that the government of Alberta put forward met all of the Indigenous procurement requirements and exceeded it. And there were many benefits to community as a result of this. So there were environmental benefits, but there were also benefits to many communities. And so I'm going to read off some of the community benefits here, because this wasn't something the government of Alberta had to do. This was something the government of Alberta chose to do because it was the right thing to do. And it wasn't within their jurisdiction. It was actually within the jurisdiction of the federal government. Right. The federal government didn't require this, but the government of Alberta knew that it was the right thing to do, so they chose to do it. In the Cold Lake First Nation, they utilized several
Ms. Goodridge, we have a point of order. I'll ask you to hold 1 second. Mr. Bruson, go ahead on your point of order.
It's just what I've been finding very interesting is all of this is the type of things that could be brought in testimony in the study. And so it seems to me that this is no longer debate about the motion and whether it should happen. It's actually trying to figure out the evidence that could be called.
So thank you, Mr. Bruson, on your point of order. The point of order is not a reference to a standing order or point of order, but your I'm going to go back to Ms. Goodridge on, I think, what your concern is about focusing on the motion.
J'aurais
and
aussi,
being able to
j'aurais aussi un point
debate it.
d'ordre. Juste,
I also have a point of order, if I may.
Mais merci.
Advising us. I'm going to go to you, Mr. Simard, on a point of order.
juste pour
Just for clarification, and I hope that my colleague is speaking on the motion that we have before us. We amended it in order to specify that this motion will deal strictly with federal standards and federal rules. I understand what is being said, but it's going to talk about the federal standards. And in the motion, it doesn't apply only to Albertan orphaned and abandoned wells. It was an attack on Alberta, said my colleague. Well, I'm only pointing this out to try to frame the comments of my colleague. We have to respect the motion with which we're seized. I'd like to know what's happening, what happened to the federal funds that were offered and not used. I'd like to know where they were used, how it worked. And so let's concentrate on the motion. Let's not get off on a sidetrack here.
So I'm just going to address Mr. Simard's point of order. My apologies. I do have to wait for interpretation because I can't, and interpreters are doing a tremendous job to hear your point of order. And I think Mr. Simard, once again, on your point of order being back to the motion, I think it's partly a point of clarification and a point of through a point of order saying that there was an amendment brought forward that changed the motion. I'm just summarizing just to make sure Ms. Goodridge knows that it's a broader, not an Alberta initiative. Thank you for providing that clarification, but it's not a point of order. I just want to let you know as well. I think Ms. Goodridge does have a copy of the new and amended motion, I believe, or you should have it. If not, we can make sure you get that. But now you have
I have a point of order.
Yes.
So very specifically, at the beginning of this conversation, I asked to have the motion sent to me so that I had it. And I did not have an amended version sent to me. And therefore, it was very much an attack on Alberta. And I understand that my colleague Shannon Stubbs had provided an amendment the last time, but the one that was sent to me at the beginning of this meeting, after asking specifically for this, was one that was a direct attack on Alberta. And so I do think that this was very wrong.
Hold on a sec. Mr. Patzer, can you hold for a moment, please? I will go to you. I just want to address Ms. Goodridge's point of order. Ms. Goodridge, we will rectify to make sure you do have the right amended motion. So you do have the correct one, so there's no more miscommunication. Apologies if you, on behalf of the committee, if the wrong one was sent to you. So we will get that back over to you. And momentarily, while I hear the point of order from Mr. Patzer. Mr. Patzer, go ahead on the point of order.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just to further add on to what Ms. Goodrich had said, yes, on that point of order, it's very much on that point of order. The motion that was recirculated today prior to question period is very much a attack on Alberta. All it does is talk about Alberta, and it talks in the preamble. It's all this exact same preamble as was we originally debated on Monday. So I'm actually concerned that we are don't even have the appropriate motion. So the fact that Mrs. Goodrich has asked to have the actual proper motion circulated and it has not been to all the members, I think needs to be addressed before we even continue down this road. So if that could happen, that would be fantastic.
Point of order.
Okay, I'm just going to hold, and I'm going to get the clerk to speak, if that's okay, Mr. Angus.
Certainly.
Unless I'm going to go to the clerk to speak on Mr. Patzer's point of order, just to provide clarity to committee members on what the motion is and what's transpired. Go ahead, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today, the committee members were sent the amended motion, the adjourned motion as amended. The preamble of the motion still makes reference to Alberta and Saskatchewan. The section of the motion, which was amended on Monday by the amendment by Mr. Simard, touches the final paragraph of the motion. It removed "in Alberta" after the words "orphan wells," and it added the word "federal" in front of the word "regulation." en français, c'est enlever en Alberta.
Remove the word Alberta and added the term federal regulation in the last paragraph.
That's the question that's being posed. The preamble does indeed still reference Alberta and Saskatchewan, as that section of the motion was not touched on Monday. Merely the bottom paragraph was indeed amended, and that is indeed the text of the motion which has been circulated today.
Thank you. And now I'm going to go to Mr. Angus on a point of order. Thank you for waiting patiently, Mr. Angus.
Oh, thank you. I had to step out for 5 minutes, so in case I missed something, could we just give us a replay of the last 5 minutes? Because I'm not sure if I missed a point.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. That's not a point of order. But thank you for that. You're letting us know that you're leaving. But I'm going to go back to you, Ms. Goodridge. You have the floor, and you can continue on with your debate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So oftentimes it's actually really interesting. Process is often ignored and people think that it doesn't really matter. But often clerks recommend against having preambles in motions because preambles are not actually the motion. But the problem is because this preamble is a direct attack on Alberta. It is a direct attack on Alberta. It says, and I quote, given that there are 1,600 abandoned and orphaned wells in Alberta polluting farmland, waterways, and air, the number of abandoned wells in Alberta are set to increase by an additional 1,800 to 2,000. These additional abandoned wells will cost more than $200 million to clean up. The government of Alberta set back $137 million because they failed to use the funds provided by the Government of Canada to clean up abandoned wells and create jobs in the pandemic. The Government of Saskatchewan used their allocated funds in their entirety to clean up abandoned wells and create jobs. Companies who abandon wells and fail to pay for their cleanup negatively impact provincial taxpayers and municipalities, and orphaned and abandoned wells present an economic opportunity to support energy solutions like geothermal energy. So I don't understand, Mr. Chair, how a normal person reading that would not see that as an absolute attack on the province of Alberta and on Albertans. And yes, fine, the motion has been amended and was expanded to include, because we know that as of 2020, Ontario has somewhere in the range of about 900 inactive wells that could become orphaned should companies go bankrupt. Overall in Canada, there's based in 2020, there were about 130,000-ish inactive, orphaned, and abandoned wells. Yes. And so if there's 130,000 in Canada, and we're saying that there are 1,800, possibly 2,000 in Alberta, that's a very small percentage of the total overall number of abandoned wells. And so it's really frustrating. So as an Albertan, I'm not going to sit here and be mansplained and explain that somehow it's okay
Point
that
of order.
All right, colleagues, I have a point of order for Mr. Angus. Go ahead.
As the old white guy in the room, I always need explanations. But since it's Mr. Bruson's motion, she doesn't look like a man. Although I've known guys who had hair longer than hers in the band.
You're doing it right now, bud.
So is Mr. Bruson mansplaining?
So Mr.
How is the mansplaining working
so Mr.
here?
Angus, not a point of order.
This is why this is so embarrassing.
Colleagues, I'm just going to remind everybody, this is an opportunity to remind everyone to raise your hand. Point of order. If you would like to debate, I'm just looking at everybody. I'm turning my head left and right. But please use the point of orders for a point of order. Please use your time to debate. If you want me to put you on the speaking order, I will, and your turn will come up. Feel free to debate as you wish when your turn comes. Thank you for your cooperation. Now, I will go back to Ms. Goodridge to continue on.
Et juste pour continuer, pour donner un à propos.
Just to clarify a little bit, there is an article in Le Devoir pointing out that there were 92 wells that were problematic.
C'est vraiment une.
So it's a problem. It's a problem everywhere in the country.
Sit here and somehow have someone say that this is absolutely a-okay and that we should be having this and we should be debating and voting on this motion because it's absolutely fine because the motion itself includes all of Alberta when the preamble, which is the first thing that people are going to see, is absolutely a full attack on my province and on the hardworking people. And this is the part that really frustrates me. There wasn't conversations and work during the pandemic trying to make sure that government money was being spent appropriately and that it wasn't going to groups like GC Strategies and all kinds of consultants that were getting rich, claiming to be Indigenous procurement space. And some of this is really important. And so the fact that the government is now putting really inflammatory language in their preambles, critiquing the government of Alberta for properly spending money to clean up these wells and not actually having a fulsome conversation is very frustrating. But
Ms. Goodridge, we have a point of order. Mr. Bruson, go ahead on the point of order.
In my experience, the whole point of such a study would be to get the fulsome explanation. That is actually what we do, is we bring the motion, then we have the witnesses come, and then we get to hear from them, and we would get to hear about what was done by Alberta, but also we'd get to hear from Saskatchewan.
So,
we get to hear from other provinces as the witnesses would like to
Thank
be
you.
proposed.
Thank you, Mr. Bruson, on your point of order. Great points to make during debate. So I want to get everybody to focus on I'm going to go to you, Mr. Dreeshen, on a point of order, and then I got you, Mr. Angus, on a point of order. But let's go to you, Mr. Dreeshen.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to respond to Mr. Bruson's point. If that is actually the case, then if she was to get rid of the preamble, that is the case. Now, it still goes into the clean these wells in Alberta, and it's talked about these wells, which of course relates to the ones that were talked about earlier. But if she is saying that she wishes to remove that, then certainly that would help.
Mr. Dreeshen, I gave you the leeway to hear your point of order. Once again, point of debate. You are on the list. You're welcome to make all those points during your time to debate. So back to you, Mr. Angus, on a point of order.
Sorry, this is strictly a point of order. I've already spoken. I have nothing more to add on this. I'm looking forward to getting ahead. But the clock is ticking down. I'm concerned my colleagues are going to talk the clock out. So it's 6:30. Are we done this gong show or?
Well, currently we are scheduled to go until 6:30.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ms. Goodridge, you have the floor again.
thank you, Mr. Chair.
On Monday, they wanted to keep going for the debate.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it is fun to come to a new committee and learn new things, but Ms. de Bruzen is in fact the Parliamentary Secretary to Natural Resources, and this motion did in fact come from her, which means if the government didn't draft it, so if the Ministry of Natural Resources didn't draft this and she drafted it herself, that's concerning to me that someone that is in the role, that is the Parliamentary Secretary for Natural Resources, would put forward such a violent attack on my home province.
Well, and needs a study to learn
and then needs a study to learn about something that she should be able to ask for a briefing from the department and be able to get. But the problem comes back down to the fact that this Liberal government sees Alberta as a cash cow. They see Alberta continually as something to be whipped, take the profits, and run. They talk about emissions caps on a regular basis. They talk about all kinds of different things.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Ms. Jones.
I'd like to clarify for the record that is not the intent of the government, nor is it the opinion of the government, and I want to put that on the record. Also, I want to say that if the government did not appreciate and value Alberta, we never would have bought the TMX pipeline in the beginning. It's a pipeline for Alberta to get oil and gas.
It's not a pipeline for Alberta. It's a pipeline for Canada in the national interest for your own approval.
35,000
and everybody else.
It's a crucial important.
All right, folks, we will
energy infrastructure
suspend.
for the whole country.
Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Legg and Mr. Shifke. We've suspended. It looks like we've suspended for the rest of the day. So we will end things there. Thank you very much for your time today, Mr. Legg. If there's any